Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah Ray from the Bloomfield Public Library. Thank you for joining us tonight as we discuss the dangers of extreme heat in partnership with CEEC. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Nancy to get us started, and I'm going to start our slideshow.
All right. Welcome to this important public education webinar on a topic that has become more relevant and more closely studied over the past decade at least. The dangers of extreme heat. This is part of an intermittent series of webinars presented by the Conservation, Energy and Environment Committee of the Town of Bloomfield, or CEEC for short, thankfully. And supported by the Bloomfield Public Library and, as you'll see, members of the Bloomfield Volunteer Ambulance. So my name is Nancy Bowden, and I've been a member of the CEEC for a couple of years. Two other members of the CEEC have worked to develop this webinar. Jessica White, who will be speaking later today, also been a member for a couple of years, if I'm remembering properly. And Claudia Guardiak, a newer member, but who could not be here tonight, but she helped a lot with content and flow of the data we want, or the information we wanted to present. We are particularly grateful, given the topic, for the vital assistance we've received from members of Bloomfield's Emergency Medical Response Network. The Bloomfield Police Department has a role of EMS coordinator that's recently been filled by Sergeant Zachary Klomberg. Unfortunately, because we had to change the date of this webinar, he's not able to be with us, but he was very helpful and gave us the names of the two people who will be speaking tonight. Ted Rogers, who is a deputy chief of the Bloomfield Volunteer Ambulance with 38 years of emergency response experience, and Hallie Jansen, an EMT and volunteer with BVA for 6 years. Okay, yep, you can move to the next slide. So what is it about extreme heat? Although we may all be spellbound and shocked by things like earthquakes, floods, tornadoes, wildfires, all these kinds of disasters that make the news. In fact, more people die worldwide every year from heat-related impacts. So it's under the radar, but extremely serious and becoming more serious every year. There's no single definition of extreme heat, but in general, we understand that extreme heat events are those that have possibly low frequency, but very high impact when they happen. And of course, as frequency increases, as we have a warming world, we need to stop thinking in terms of events that happen once in 100 years, as we often hear said in the media, but in fact, think about them as potential disasters that we need to prepare for now in order to minimize the catastrophe, the impact on people, keep people safe. Recently, there's been some new terms coming into the into weather conversations. In particular, one we'll talk about tonight is heat dome, which refers to a prolonged period of high heat that seems stuck in place and maybe even self-perpetuating. This term is replacing heat wave, which we're more familiar with. And although the exact conditions are different, in the general public, we can use them interchangeably for our purposes. One infamous heat wave people may remember, or heat dome, occurred 30 years ago in 1995 in Chicago, where the official death count was 739 lives in less than a week. And this was a very shocking event. No one was prepared for it. And since then, the city of Chicago has done quite a bit to change their policies, their protocols, their ability to respond. And they often do have some prolonged heat dome or heat wave situations. So that's really what we have in mind is that it could happen at any time in any place, and we want to be sure that Bloomfield and its residents are prepared. Okay, you can move to the next slide. And I don't know how easy this is to see, but this is a graph of average annual temperatures in Connecticut. The time frame is 1954 to 1924. I mean, to 2024, only so that I can say in my lifetime, the average annual heat in Connecticut has risen significantly. In fact, in the very last two dots, 2023 and 2024, rival the all-time high that happened in 2012. And all the temperatures in the last decade or 12 years even exceed those average temperatures that happened during my first 10, 20, and even 30 years of life. So the trend is pretty much unmistakable. I do want to point out, if this is averages, and so that often hides a lot of things that happen that can be much worse. And in particular, if we looked at data only from the cities in Connecticut, we would see dot points much higher on the graph. And that's because of something called the urban heat island effect. And I think this is something we want to be familiar with even in Bloomfield, because we certainly have areas that this would apply to. And the heat island effect is from the accumulation of buildings, especially tall buildings in the city, and paved surfaces, along with a lack of trees, waterways, and green spaces in general, that magnify and trap heat, so that breezes don't get through, and even nighttime cooling is diminished. And that's an important factor that we want to keep in mind going forward. Okay, next slide. This is, I picked a couple of more recent heat dome tragedies. People may remember this. It was during the early part of the pandemic time, when during 1 week, Seattle, just the city of Seattle, experienced 100 heat-related deaths, and another 38 that possibly came from heat damage. And we'll learn more about that later in the webinar. And this is an area, the Pacific Northwest is an area that very rarely gets heat like this. Most homes do not have air conditioning. That obviously added to the tragedy. And I would add that this same heat dome episode was felt up in British Columbia, Canada, which most definitely is not used to air conditioning. So again, the point being here that it can happen anywhere, even if it's not your usual kind of weather. Okay, the next slide relates to Phoenix, Arizona, which is a city that's used to having very high heat. I've been there when you can't even walk across Amosite without your shoes sticking to the pavement. And people tend to spend their summer days inside as much as possible. But even then, a couple years ago, they had a heat dome. And again, the heat didn't move. The heat stuck around in it. And this headline says 100 days with 100 degrees plus and 645 heat-related deaths. So imagine, and as you can see in this headline, the words "with no end in sight." Imagine we've had a couple heat waves this year. Imagine having a 5-day heat wave and someone's telling you, we don't know when it's going to be over. It's a very panicking and helpless feeling. And you can run your air conditioner all day. How much is that going to cost you after a week or two? What if the grid goes down because it can't handle that much? I mean, there are a lot of concerns about that. Even if you do have central air in your house, you're not necessarily protected from something very extreme like this. Okay, next slide. What is the heat index? That's something that's often talked about in weather forecasts, weather.com, if you look at all these things to see what's coming. This goes beyond the temperatures that we were looking at in the last few slides, which are dry air temperature. In other words, what your thermometer would say if you looked out the window at an outdoor thermometer. And it combines that temperature with relative humidity of the air. And sometimes it's called the feels like temperature. And you hear the meteorologist say that it will feel like much hotter than it will read on the thermometer. Another term that we're not going to get into too much, and we struggled with it, is called wet bulb temperature. And that also talks about the dry air temperature combined with humidity and the effect on the human body. But it's a little bit different. So in trying to figure out a good way to explain it, much as I dislike AI, I did find a fairly brief explanation of the two, and so I'm going to read that to you. The heat index, which we just talked about, also known as the apparent temperature, is a measure of how hot it feels to the human body when relative humidity is combined with air temperature. Wet bulb temperature, on the other hand, is the lowest temperature to which the air can be cooled by the evaporation of water into it. And the more humid the air is, the less it can absorb evaporation. So that's the connection there. While both involve moisture and temperature, they represent different aspects of how we perceive the heat. So again, we're not going to get into wet bulb, but because it's coming up more and more in weather shows and maybe discussions of climate change, one thing you can think of in trying to grasp the concept is that the higher the wet bulb temperature is, the less you are going to be able to cool yourself off just by sweating, because the air can't absorb and take the evaporation off your skin. So both show that humidity and heat, regular heat, combine to make things worse for humans. Now, the next slide just shows a couple of, well, it shows a lot of examples. We're only going to talk about a couple of the heat index and the increasing danger. Those four colors are increasing danger to the human body. And it shows that it's not linear. You can kind of see the curve in the slide, but beyond that, if you can see the chart, I'll read the numbers to you that I want to talk about. If it's 80 degrees, that's the first column. If it's 80 degrees outside and 70% humidity, which is a little higher than comfortable, but not terrible, that makes the heat index, or the feels like temperature, 83 degrees. Not too bad. It's up about 3 degrees. And it's still in that lighter yellow caution zone. If the temperature outside is 90 degrees and still at 70% humidity, so I'm not changing that, the feels like temperature jumps to 105 and into the orange zone, which is the danger zone. So you can see the combination of the two is very important to keep in mind when you're planning your own safety and making sure people around you are safe. Then move to the next slide, which is just a table that kind of explains, and Hallie and Ted will get into this more, explains what the different categories mean. It's the same four categories. Caution is probably where you're going to feel the heat. You can just use common sense measures to keep yourself cool, hydrated, go in the shade, maybe go swimming, rest and do your heavy work in the morning or in the evening when it cools off. And then it progresses through higher levels of risk and caution, where you could get into problems with heat cramps, heat exhaustion, and the most dangerous of all, which is heat stroke. So this is the point at which I'm going to turn the presentation over to Ted Rogers and Hallie Jansen to give us a lot more in-depth medical information from their experiences and knowledge. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. So the best way to think about the body's circulatory system is like the water pump or the fuel pump in your car. You have your pipes, you have a pump, and you have the water. And that's basically how your circulatory system is. In this case, the pipes are your blood, the pump is obviously the heart, and the water, fluids and blood and everything. So what's happening is we're having a problem with our pump, and it's either the heart, the vessels, or the fluid. And in fact, in this case, they all work together to fall apart. So the body has two methods for cooling itself. Vasodilation. The vessels are expanding. By the vessels expanding, the blood flow isn't as much, and that's why our skin feels cooler. That's how we're sort of able to get the heat evaporation going, and by sweating. Sweat and water and salt follow each other. So when we're sweating, we're losing fluids, but we're also losing a lot of elements. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So those are the two things that are done, that the body does as a regulatory system to handle the heat. So next slide for me, Sarah, please. Thank you. So if it's starting to get hot, the vessels start to dilate more and more, we have all these other things that are happening. So the vessels expand. Well, our fluid has stayed the same, or we're actually losing that fluid. We don't have as much of that fuel. The same thing like in a water pump. You know, when you have your a leak in your house, like a water leak or the hot water heater leaks, you're losing that water, you're losing that fluid. And what happens is the heart, in this case, our pump, is still trying to maintain things going around, and it's sensing, hey, I don't have enough stuff going here. I got to pump faster to make things keep going. And as it pumps faster and faster, it starts to take a toll on your system. We're still losing fluid. And because of that, it's not moving forward. You're not getting that pressure, and everything's starting to collapse on us. And what's going to happen is the body starts trying to hold on to what it has, because our fluid carries oxygen. And the body's going to try and hold on to it, to its main parts: the brain, the heart, the lungs, the liver, and the kidneys. Those are our 7 vital organs. But what's going to happen is the heart's very selfish. So it's going to start shutting everything else down. And you start seeing things, your body starts basically shutting down. The kidneys will go down, your lungs, everything starts to go. So it's just working harder and harder. So we really want to be making sure we avoid getting to this point. Sarah, you can go to the next one. So, and just like I said, loss of fluid decreases the volume of the blood. And it's going to impact our heart too, because the sweat that we have, the heart needs 4 elements. It needs potassium, sodium, magnesium, and obviously fluid. When we sweat, we're losing all these elements. And what's happening is, because we're losing those elements, because we're losing that fluid, the kidneys aren't able to function. The kidneys need that fluid to keep things going, and that starts to decrease the kidneys go down. We have kidney failure. Our body now can't filter the waste that we need to get out. So now that's starting to shut down. So you're starting to see this whole system starting to just fall apart on us. It's obviously, we're talking, an extensive period of sweating. We're not talking like, you're outside or you do a run for 20, 30 minutes. We're talking about sort of like the weather we've had the last few days, that last heat wave we had, and you're outside for 4, 5, 6 hours doing just extensive work. Especially if you have the football team, they're doing their 2-a-days. They're really going to be monitoring stuff. Or even, today we had a fire over on East Dudleytown Road, and we were there. Well, a lot of times in those situations, we're not just there to provide first aid, but we might be monitoring these firefighters too. These guys are going through a whole lot of stuff. They might be the heat that we've had, and then they've got about, Hallie, back me up on this, they have about 35 to 70 pounds of gear that they're carrying on
At
themselves.
least, yeah.
Yeah. And now you cut that in the fire, fires about 150, maybe 200 degrees, along with the heat outside, and they're in there for about even at 20, 30 minutes. That's a lot of work. So we're really starting to make sure we're able to rehab these guys. We're keeping an eye on them. We're going to do their vitals and everything else. And we carry water, sports drinks. I work out in Vernon for the fire department out there on the EMS division. Anytime a call comes in for a structure fire, we take 2 cases of water, and we go right to the scene with them, and we just hand them out if we have to. So, but the problem is, as we lose our fluid, we're not just losing fluid, we're losing our elements. We're losing that sodium, we're losing the potassium, we're losing that magnesium. And because of that, the heart needs those to function. So now we're dealing with complicated rhythms. And again, because the organs aren't having these things that they need, they start to shut down, and now the whole body starts to shut down, and it gets worse and worse. We're just basically going downhill from there. So, Sarah, you can go. So there's different things to know. Heat strain and what's worse, the signs and symptoms are the same. So basically, heat strain is basically the body's response to a heat stress, being in that hot situation. Maybe you're out doing some stuff in the 90-degree heat the other day, and you had some stuff going. Some things work at home, some things are fine, but then there are times where you should be calling 911. When in doubt, don't be afraid to call us. We're here. This is what we do. We try to have ourselves staffed around the clock, and if we're available, we'll come on out. We can assess you. Just because you show up doesn't mean you have to go with us. You can go on, you can go to your own doctors if you want. You can go to an urgent care, or even just, I think I'll just stay home, and you can always call us back. We're here for you. That's our purpose. So, Sarah, you can go. So heavy sweating during intense exercise is really what we're talking about. These are heat cramps. So playing tennis in the weather, muscle pain or spasms. Basically, your muscles are slightly dehydrated. They're losing that water. They're losing the fluid and those elements to be able to contract. So they're contracting up. Magnesium also, if you can take a magnesium pill at night, that usually works too to take help, especially if you get night cramps. That works too. Water, sports drinks are great. The one thing you have to be careful with sports drinks, though, is there's a lot of stuff in them. You look at Gatorade. When Gatorade first showed up 50 years ago at the University of Florida, which is why it's called Gatorade, because it was by the Florida Gators. It was basically just water, potassium, sodium, salt, and sugar. That was it. Next time you're at the supermarket, just go look at a bottle of Gatorade and see what's in there now. It's a whole lot of stuff. There's a whole lot of stuff. And there's a whole lot of sugar in them now too. Because basically what happens is when we drink something with sugar, it's sweet, it makes us crave it more. We want to drink more of it. So they're trying to get us to buy more. So a couple things about that. Pedialyte works great. Or take your Gatorade and cut it with water, or even those sugar-free things. The other things you're starting to see also at the supermarkets are these hydration IV mix packets. You can add those into water if you like those, or there's a couple of others too. I know there's a thing called Element, LMNT. That's a salt replacement. Again, be careful, especially the hydration ones. You want to make sure that you're getting something that doesn't have a lot of sugar in it, because basically the sugar it's not going to help. It's okay to have some. The body does need glucose. Your brain needs glucose, but you don't want to be drinking, a big bottle of sugar. So if you start feeling those intense, the cramps, just stop what you're doing, get somewhere cool, get your fluids in, make sure that your cramps are going away. Maybe rub rubbly if you have to. If it's not going away, go get help. Call us if you want, or go to a doctor on your own. You might be on a low sodium diet, because when we sweat, we're losing those elements that we talked about. We're drinking in water. Hey, that's great. Our fluids are up, but we're not replacing those other elements. So what's happening is we've got our fluid in, but we don't have our elements replaced. And what's actually happening is we're actually diluting the elements we have. So you're thinning out those sodium levels, which is what your muscles really need. So you can actually make yourselves worse if you're drinking a lot of water and not getting in. Again, that's where those hydration drinks come in. That's where the sports drinks come in. But a lot of times for heat cramps, basically just some water, get yourself cool, maybe an ice pack, cool yourself out for a little bit, and go from there. And keep an eye on yourself. So, know your history. If you're on a low sodium diet, monitor yourself for that.
You also want to be careful with the longer you're out in the heat, and if you are drinking a ton of fluid, a ton of water, you want to make sure you don't make yourself nauseous as well, because a lot of the time people will take gallons of water and ends up doing the opposite by giving them different symptoms, nausea, vomiting. And if you start to vomit, then you're losing more fluid than you actually were taking in before. So heat cramps, it's more the minor side of it, but you still want to be cautious that you're not drinking too much fluid too fast to where you start making yourself worse inadvertently. Uh,
Yep. Good point, Hal. Next slide, please. So heat exhaustion. Heat exhaustion is a little more severe. Whoa, whoa, there we go. Heat exhaustion, a little more severe. Again, being out a long time, you're seeing that cool, pale, clammy skin. The reason the skin is cold or cool is because your vessels are there's just no blood flow coming up to that skin because the vessels have dilated. They're getting, and it's just there. Fast and weak pulse. Our heart is working faster and faster. The nausea and vomiting. The body's sensing something's wrong. Something's wrong here. There's something bad inside me. I've got to get stuff out. So they're going to, you start feeling sick. You don't feel so well. You start throwing up those cramps again. You're tired. You're weak. Uh, um, you might be dizzy because, again, you're feeling those headaches. You're dizzy. Your brain isn't getting, you're losing the water, which is what your brain needs. You're losing your elements, which is what your brain needs. So that's what's could be causing that headache. And you can see the symptoms are pretty much, they're a little more extreme, but the treatment's still the same. Move to a cool place, keep those clues loose. A wet cloth is good. There's some of these my dad did his army training at Fort Riley, and he had a towel, and I'll do this occasionally on really hot days. You take you can get these little scarves or bandanas, you soak them in water. I'll put it right on my back of my neck. You want to put maybe at your neck or right here, and those help with keeping yourself cool along those lines. Again, sipping your water. Cool bath. I'm sure all of us at some point in the last couple of weeks during this heat wave came home from a day and, oh my gosh, it's so hot and tired. You just stepped into get to take a nice cold shower when we got home. Just felt good. It's that same idea. It's that same idea. And you should be calling us if the symptoms are getting worse or if they're lasting long. If you're not getting better or if you're getting worse, call us. If you start throwing up, you should be calling us. We can give you IV fluids. We can even give medications here in the field if we think it's necessary to help with the vomiting. But again, we'll start the fluids going. We can get things going on that end too. We have IVs. We have paramedics here 24 hours. During the day, we try to run the 2 medic units if we can. So we can start the treatments right then and there. So next slide. So heat stroke, this is the worst one, and it's a high temp of 103 or even higher. In the hospital, they're using something called they're doing active hypothermia. It's called an Arctic sun. And basically, it's a big cooling blanket that they're going to put on this patient, and it just working to bring their sugar down. The skin's hot, red, and dry. This because what happened is the body is just so overwhelmed from this heat episode that's happening. It's shut down. It's shut down. This is a critical emergency. Their pulse is fast. They're strong. They're confused because what's happening is they're confused because their body, their brain isn't have the elements that they need. Doesn't have that water. Doesn't have that sugar. Doesn't have those elements. So now it doesn't, and it's because there's less fluid. It's not getting oxygen, and because of that, again, now the brain is starting to shut down too. We're trying to avoid this part. So basically, this is sort of as I was watching all this, it's the reverse of hypothermia. The colder you get, they start to shut down. It's the same thing here. The hotter you get, you're going to shut down. This is a critical emergency. You should be calling right away. Calling us, get them to a cool place. I'm not crazy about putting a person in a bath just because there could be an altered mental status. How are you going to get them in the bath if they're confused? Uh, and then, of course, for us, it's well, now we have to get them out of that bath and get them out of the house. That can be difficult in some of the houses here in town. Um, if Hallie, I'm sure will tell you, some of these, we find people in the most precarious positions, and really, uh, the easier you can make it for us would be the better. We would appreciate that. But a cool cloth is fine. Ice packs, if you have ice packs, do that. Or just take a cold cloth or some paper towels, wet them, and just put them, get them on that, I would say right up here on that chest or even the armpits. That'll start to start some cooling process. Don't give them anything to drink. you're thinking, well, the same thing you hear all the time. Oh, well, maybe they're diabetic. Let's give them a piece of candy. Well, they're in altered mental status. They might not be able to answer questions. They might not be able to respond. And what can happen now is if you give them this something to drink, they might not be able to swallow very well. They're going to choke on it. And now they throw up. And there's another problem we have with people vomiting is that stuff can, or the water can end up in their lungs. If they ended up in the lungs, they get pneumonia, and that can cause a whole bunch of other health issues. So really, just avoid giving them something to drink. We're going to come in. We can give an IV. We're going to get that fluid in a lot quicker, a lot faster than if you guys than giving them something to drink. Really, it's about knowing those signs. Just get them cool, start the process, and calling 911. The quicker you get us there, the quicker we can start care. We can take them to the hospital. We can call the hospital, and they can be ready for this patient before we even get there. Um, Along those lines too.
A lot of these situations as well, when heat emergencies get to this point, is we also, the reason that we really say like call 911 right away, even if you don't think you're bad, like we want to start heading over your way because when it comes to this point, I just completely lost my train of thought. I apologize.
The later it
But
gets, the harder it is to turn them around.
correct. And especially like just echoing Ted's point about like cool baths and everything. If somebody even is by themselves and is like, I'm gonna go cool myself off in the bath, we get there because they call 911, we're knocking at your door, they rush out of the bath, slip, fall, they could hurt themselves even more. And I don't want people to be scared about that, but these are like the worst situations. So that's also why we ask you to call before it gets to this point. Even though a lot of people know their own bodies, they know what they can do, just give us a call. Like we can always turn around and we're happy to see you do better. But
Yeah. I mean, we're doing paperwork one way or the other, so it doesn't matter to us.
mhm,
But we'd rather, I have no problem writing a refusal. I would rather write a
mhm,
refusal than have to write a full run form about everything that's, having to go to the hospital and have, 2 or 3 IVs and calling for this and doing that. We don't mind. And the flip side is that this is what we're here for. So, even if
mhm,
one way or the other, this is why we're here. We're glad to take you. If at the same time, yeah, I like to write a refusal, but at the same time, I'd like to get a person and help keep them alive and keep them around a little bit longer. And I think Hallie would back me up on that.
mhm. And it's also a much more controlled environment where we can work in our space, the hospital can do their
Yep.
thing, and you're not cooling yourself off too fast, you're not drinking too much fluid too fast. So,
Yep. Just call us. Let us do what we do. We've been doing this a while. We've been trained for this. We have the toys. We have the training. Uh, Put us to use. Okay. So who's at risk? Obviously, young children, they're not able to regulate. Elderly, I think we've seen a lot of that this last few weeks. I think we've had quite a few elderly people because they also have a whole bunch of other health issues too. They can't really take care of themselves or the people who are working or playing outside. We talked about firefighters, road crews. Of course, we all know Connecticut is well known for construction on the highways and the roads during the summer. Um, we see those guys out there, we're obviously working with hot tar, tar that can actually ruin your boots. So should be keeping on them. And in pre-existing medical conditions or medications, especially our diabetics, because they think they're fine and they're going on doing their stuff. It's just a lot of output. And next thing you know, their blood sugar is dangerously low. And then people who live alone or have problems with changing their routines. I find with the elderly, especially, they're very keyed in to their routines, and that's how they get through the day. I mean, I saw it with my parents. Uh, they just they have their whole routine going, and if there's a slight change, it's like absolute chaos. It's absolute. I would have to spend 15, 20 minutes just talking my mom off of the ledge because a nurse didn't wash her hands walking into the room and she's ready to shut down the whole nursing home. And I'm like, well, how does that help you? It doesn't. Let's just tell them to wash their hands. um, especially people who live alone, and be aware of their routines. We talk about if you see something, say something. I think especially with if you know elderly in your neighborhood or people in your neighborhoods who might be living alone, if you don't see something, say something. If you know every day that Carl comes out, checks the paper, likes to do a perimeter around his yard to make sure the garden's fine, and you haven't seen Carl all day, might want to go check on him. I actually had a case like this a few weeks ago. People hadn't seen this person for quite an extensive period of time, and it turned out that that person had passed. So, so again, if you don't see the people you know, or if you see them and they're behaving in a different way, um, don't be afraid to just go over and go, "Hey, are you okay? What's going on today?" And a lot of these people, we think Nancy's talking about central air, and yeah, central air is in a lot of homes. But Hallie, I'm sure you'll back me up. We've gone into a lot of places, especially here in Bloomfield, where there is no air conditioning. There's maybe a fan,
Mhm.
and these houses are just incredibly hot. I know up in Vernon and Rockville where I work, I think the last 2, 3 days I've been going into houses without any proper ventilation because it's just too much. They can't afford it. Or they're on oxygen and their oxygen tanks run out. So these are also other people you should be checking on to making sure that that they're okay. And if they're not okay, call us. We can, figure things out um, and go from there. And if you think you might be at increased risk, obviously check with your doctor. Um, always check with your doctor if before you do anything, uh, especially if you've never played any athletic sports, you decide to go play pickleball for 4 hours, check with your doctor about that, just to make sure. So,
And I know that our elderly population in town, there are a lot of people who do prefer being on the warmer side than the colder side. There are a lot of people who you'll see wrapped up in blankets and it's 80 degrees outside just because they get cold much easier. So sometimes people don't realize how hot they're actually getting until they get to these points where they don't even realize they've stopped sweating. So there's that side, and also young children. A lot of people don't necessarily see, and I apologize, there's an airplane going over our house if you can't hear me. Um, but kids are pretty resilient, and you're not going to know that they're suffering for a long time because they will continue to compensate for heat exhaustion and all these things, and you won't even know that it's happening in a kid because a kid will be running around doing absolutely everything normal, and then next thing you know, they crash. So you definitely want to keep an eye on not just the young and the older population, but just anyone, because everybody thinks they know their own limits until they get to a point where it's past it. So you want to just make sure you're checking on everyone.
and the harder part with kids is once they crash, it's a lot harder to get them back because their systems are entirely different from adults. We're cardiac
Mhm.
driven. Kids are respiratory driven. So when they go down, it's a lot more work and can be a lot more difficult to get them back. So
Mhm.
really keep an eye. And the elderly, they're on blood thinners. A lot of them are on blood thinners, Coumadin, Eliquis, Plavix. So because their blood is thinned out, they're going to be colder. They're going to feel colder, so they bundle themselves up more. So they might not realize what's going on. So how do we keep cool? Well, during the extremely hot weather this past time around, um, the department actually advocated. We had water set up. We had Gatorade in our fridges. We tried to have extra crews, and even at the hospitals. So that's what we did.
I can jump in here too, Ted. Thank you so much to you and Haley for all the really, really great information that you guys shared. That was super informative. I've been working on this for months and I just learned stuff listening to you guys. So thank you. But yeah, we do want to turn this a little bit to our audience and just hear some ideas that you have. We are going to go through some suggestions that we have as well, but what are the things that you've been doing? We've had several days this summer so far that have reached 100 degrees. So, what have you done during that time to help keep yourself cool? What are some of your go-to tips and tricks? And Sarah, if you don't mind, you can also go to the next slide as well.
while people are taking a moment to type things in the chat, if they are so inclined to do so and share some of their ideas, I'll start talking about some of the ideas that we have to share with you of things you can do to keep cool in the heat. As we were researching and putting these slides and this information together, we pulled information from a number of places. Some of them were things like Good Housekeeping articles, but also like medical journals like The Lancet also had some information. The CDC was another place that we sort of just pulled little tidbits from a bunch of places and compiled them all together. It really came down to like two categories. Some of them were environmental things, so it's like the setup of the community, even what your house is built out of. There's other ways, just strategies that you can do within your home, how you're ventilating it and airing it out, things like that, that I'll talk about in a minute. Those would be environmental type of strategies. But then there's also individual things, right? Like how you're dressing your body, when you're taking your cool showers or your drinks or even the foods and things that you're eating. All of those can play a factor into how your body is responding to the heat. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but that's okay. We can jump into our suggestions that we have. Next slide, please, Sarah. So I'll start with community and environmental factors. So Nancy had talked about this a little bit in her section in the introduction about the urban heat island. So this is, in areas where there's a lot of blacktop surfaces, so parking lots or buildings. I think of areas in town like Day Hill Road, where there's a lot of warehouses, right, that are surrounded by big parking lots. Those would be examples of places that this might happen, where there's not a lot of trees or green spaces that are absorbing the heat that's coming down, and it's just getting reflected back up. So places like cities or industrial zones, or where there's certain building materials like the asphalt, the blacktops, things like that, are going to do a lot more to absorb the heat and create warmer environments. So what are the things that we can do? We can be intentional about having shading infrastructure, creating shade in your yards, even just having like, they sell like awning kind of things. You can put like sheets up or something like that just to create a little barrier. Building recreation sites that have more shades. I know they're much more intentional with playgrounds and things like that these days. You'll see a lot of times they have like, big, I don't know what you'd call them, like canopy kind of things that are put up that are just intentionally creating this shade that wasn't a lot of playgrounds I had when I was a kid. Remember getting burned by some of those slides back then. But also things like plantings and grass and trees, having trees, islands within parking lots are other things that can help to break up some of that. In town, we have a great initiative that's been going on for years called Trees for Bloomfield, where there's an effort made to plant trees throughout the town in different municipal places. I don't know if there's trees available right now, but I think they do that every year in the spring. So definitely look out for that as well. Next slide, please.
Those slides are what made our generation tough, Jessica.
Yeah, no, exactly right. Character, that's what we got from that. So things that you can do more around your own home. We all know air conditioning is probably the go-to if that is something that is accessible to you, but there are a lot of limitations that come along with air conditioning. They are expensive to run. We know energy is really expensive these days, so all those appliances that suck up a lot of energy, like air conditioners, can really affect your energy bill as well, which is something I'm sure most people are very concerned about these days. And then we also run into situations like, what if there's a blackout or a brownout or something like that, right? When there's a lot of pressure being put on the energy grid, for example, is when we see more instances like that happen. So maybe if you even have an air conditioning, it's not available to you. There could be other things that you can do. So we think about things like window shadings, literally just blocking the sun from coming in. They make like blackout curtains that you can get that are a little bit thicker that really keep that light from coming in. They block out some of that warm energy. And then you keep them closed in the daytime, and then in the evening you can open them up and let some more of the cool air come in once the sun goes down and it's later in the day. Those can be really effective and cost-efficient strategies that you can use. Keeping your lights off, operating appliances in the evening when it's cooler instead of during the day. Using fans to help circulate air, creating a cross breeze. So if you're having windows on opposite sides of your house open, having a fan in between them that's helping to move the air going through your home, that can be a really effective way to do that. And wetting your skin while that's happening too. Having your skin be cool, it's basically mimicking what sweating is doing, but making your body have to work a little bit less for it because you're giving the cool water, putting the cool water on your skin. That can help make things like fans work even better. Installing something like a ceiling fan can also be really helpful. A dehumidifier can be another good strategy. Nancy also talked about how humidity can make heat less tolerable for us. It can make it just feel a lot stickier and less comfortable. So something like a dehumidifier can help to just clear the air and make the air not feel so thick in your home. Next slide, please. So things that you can do to keep your body cool. First is just staying hydrated, making sure that you're drinking water. Cold water is ideal, but if you're sweating, it can be water of any temperature. Doing things like putting your feet in cold water can be something that can help to cool down your body. I'm not sure, maybe Ted, I don't know if you know any details about this, it's the circulation or something like that that helps with that, but that's an interesting strategy that was suggested.
Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but I do remember. It's the same thing like with dogs too, like their paws. When the dogs
Yeah,
get hot, putting little like water on their paws. I forget the reasoning behind it right now, but that does work. I think Callie
right.
wants to chime in.
I've heard feet, hands, some people put like cold packs under their armpits because those areas have a lot of vessels that are actually near the skin. The feet and the hands, if you have calluses a lot, I don't see how that would impact it a lot, but especially like the your core, like your belly, your back, under your armpits, I would suggest those are great places to put cold packs on.
Yeah, I would back Callie on that one. Armpits, back of your neck. I would go there first, foremost, just because like she said, it's a lot easier. Especially if we have a lot of diabetics in town, so they're going to have the calloused hands and they're going to have the calluses on their feet, and it could be very sensitive. I would say, 'cause those are your, like I said, the core parts. That's like the main parts of your engine. You go there and it'll get sent out to everywhere else.
Right. Good. Awesome. Also good to mention again, if people have pre-existing conditions or certain medical conditions too, that they might have to think about things differently than others. Awesome. Okay, so ice towel on the neck or chest, that pretty much just echoing what you had said. Another suggestion would be to skip the alcohol. Alcohol is something that definitely affects how hydrated your body is and how you're holding on to those liquids. So that can affect your ability to sweat and all that stuff. Avoiding that can help your body weather warm weather. Wearing loose and light clothing, wearing damp clothing or short shirts, wetting your hair, but beware of direct ice and skin contact. Just wrap it in a towel or something like that. Next slide.
Yeah,
And oh, didn't have so much.
the reason for not having direct ice contact is that the ice in direct contact with the skin can actually cause damage to the skin. Because of the same thing with like, it's basically sort of you get how frostbite happens, and it's that same idea. So wrap that ice pack in a towel or some paper towels, and then put it on the skin.
Great, thank you. So some other suggestions are limiting cooking hot meals, opting for salads or sandwiches, things like that, not using your oven to heat up your kitchen. I know I made a bad mistake when it was one of those 100 degrees days and we made pizza at home and realized it was a really terrible decision because it was very hot in our house after we did that. So don't do things like that. Staying inside during peak hours, being in like malls or other indoor places are good options. I know it's a popular place for people to go and walk laps, for example. I know when it's really hot and I don't want to walk my dog outside, taking them to like Home Depot or Lowe's, which sounds random, but they allow dogs in there and it's a cooler place to walk and you don't have to worry about them burning their paws and things like that. So going to some big public places like that could be good options to still be active when it's really hot. Make sure you just relax and take it easy. Take less productivity and more breaks. And look out for the people around you as well, right? If you are working outdoors or something like that, not just taking care of yourself, but make sure that you're paying attention to people, that they're not showing any signs of overheating or worse symptoms happening as well. And then finally, never leaving people or pets in closed cars. We know that that's terrible inside the car. It gets even hotter than it is outside very quickly. So that can be a really bad situation very fast. So something to be aware of. Next slide, please. And this is where we will wrap it up. So we've mentioned, all the signs and symptoms that Ted and Haley had discussed. Calling 911, right? It's better to be safe than sorry. And even if they come and assess and nothing happens after that, it's better than not acting and having a worse situation come, or right, a situation that can't be turned around. Calling 211 is also a good place for more information. 211 can tell you about all kinds of social services. They can tell you where you can find cooling centers near you. And a good thing to note about the cooling centers is a lot of them do close overnight. I think ours, I'm sorry, Nancy, I know we talked about this. I was the Human Services building, I think is what they usually use, and they typically follow the state's protocol, right? I believe.
Yeah, and the libraries will be used. Prosser's
Yeah.
not open currently, but I don't know if they're using McMahon right now, but are they? Sarah's saying yes. Okay. So ultimately, the libraries will join during their normal hours, and as well as the community center.
Great. And then finally, it's a great idea for this and many other reasons to sign up for the town alerts. And you can do that by going to the town's website. There's a button if you scroll down that says stay connected. And you can click there and sign up for text messages or emails to be able to get information as needed. And I believe that's the end of our presentation. I did see one question come in through the chat that I think would go to Ted or Haley. It says, does quinine water or tonic water help alleviate muscle cramps?
So the research shows that it really doesn't have any real benefit. There's no real remedy. Quinine really is more for malaria. That's basically what it became famous for. The soldiers would take, especially going to Korea or other spots, they have the quinine to help reduce the chances of getting malaria. At the same time, I'm always say, hey, if it works for you and you drink the quinine water and it works and you feel good, why stop? So that'd be my point. But I wouldn't be going. I'm not going to go around and advocate. Oh, you should drink quinine water. Um, in fact, I haven't heard quinine since I saw it in that MASH episode of where they were giving out quinine. I don't know if anybody ever saw that one, but yeah, yeah, whatever. Yeah, if it works for you and you like doing it, go ahead. But don't feel like you have to. I think would be my best answer.
Excellent. So I'm going to stop the recording and we can open up for more Q&A.